It's early Sunday morning on July 14th, 2002, and most of the residents of Bonnyville, Alberta are still asleep. But not completely. Doreen Bradley's power is out, and someone is in the house with her.
In a small town where everything is familiar, when a new vehicle pops up and is suddenly parked in the area, you tend to notice that.
There are multiple stab wounds. A total of 31.
This victim, she had stab wounds like punctures that had no blood coming from them.
They may know the victim. They may have had a reason to be with the victim. They may, in fact, be their murderer.
What happens on that day is shocking, horrifying, and bewildering. The town of Bonnyville, Alberta, is located on the north shore of Jessie Lake. The lake is an important staging area for thousands of migrating birds, attracting bird watchers from around the world. Much of the local economy is driven by this tourist activity, along with local oil and gas developments. The community thrives as a hub for agriculture, with many farmers and ranchers visiting daily. If you follow Highway 55 approximately 29 kilometers northwest of Bonnyville, you'll come to the tiny hamlet of Iron River. Here, on an acreage just off the highway, lies the home of Doreen Bradley. Formerly of Taber, Alberta, 58-year-old Doreen Bradley has only lived in this house for a short time. Less than 2 years. She's been married and divorced twice, has 4 children, 3 grandchildren, 7 brothers and sisters, as well as numerous nieces and nephews. But she lives alone. Doreen is in the process of selling this property and plans to move into Bonnyville, where she'll be closer to work. But for the time being, she still resides in this isolated house, 40 kilometers away. Doreen manages a fast food restaurant in Bonnyville. A good manager needs to be good with people. Knowing how to get results from employees while still treating them with kindness and respect is a recipe for success. Knowing how to deal with the public, some of whom will be angry or unreasonable, is another invaluable skill for a restaurant manager. It can make the difference between struggling to find a place in the market and having a loyal following of lifelong customers. It takes hard work and dedication to build a successful business, and Doreen's restaurant is definitely a success. It's been a fixture in Bonnyville for many years. A lot of people like to start their day with a cup of coffee and a bite to eat. As a result, Some fast food restaurants open quite early to accommodate them. This one begins serving people at 5:30 a.m. As the manager of a place like this, Doreen would likely have to be there even earlier to get things ready. Managers are often the last to leave as well. This can make for a long workday. On the evening of July 13th, 2002, a man and a woman from St. Paul, Alberta meet Doreen on her acreage. Planning to move into town soon, she gives the couple her dog, who is used to country living. They are the last people to see her alive. Sometime during the night, there's a storm that knocks out all of the electricity in Doreen's home. Concerned, she wonders if her restaurant has been affected. At 4:50 a.m. on July 14th, 2002, she calls an employee to find out. The morning staff assures Doreen that they have power and all is well. After describing the power failure to her employee, Doreen says something that suggests she's not alone. The employee hears her say, "What other person do you want me to call?" This question is not directed at the employee, and in fact seems to be said as Doreen hangs up the phone. This leaves the distinct impression that someone else is there, but the employee has no idea who. Since Doreen's divorce, she's enjoying dating again. Perhaps she's seeing someone new. At around 5:30 a.m. on July 14th, 2002, Gordon Maths is driving along the highway in front of Doreen's home. It's so early that the highway is practically deserted.
It's not uncommon for people to drive almost on autopilot, especially when, they're driving in a fairly quiet area, the road is very straight. You often think back and don't even remember the last stretch of the road that you were driving on until something happens. And then suddenly that moment sticks in your brain and it doesn't go away.
Gordon's vehicle is cut off by a black truck speeding out of Doreen's driveway. The truck proceeds to drive erratically on the wrong side of the highway. As the truck cuts him off, Gordon manages to get a look at the driver. Gordon later describes the truck driver as a middle-aged man with shoulder-length dark hair.
When someone nearly runs you off the road, you tend to remember it.
He has no idea who the man is, and he's never seen the truck before, but it definitely came out of Doreen Bradley's driveway. One of Doreen's sons describes his mother as someone who picks up men like strays. Sometimes the wrong men. Perhaps this long-haired middle-aged man is one of them. A few hours later, between 9:15 and 9:45 a.m., another vehicle drives past Doreen Bradley's house. Betty Grutyson is driving along the highway in front of Doreen's home when something catches her eye. It's a small white car parked near Doreen's house.
In a small town where everything is familiar, when a new vehicle pops up and is suddenly parked in the area, you tend to notice that. For a witness, when they see something that's different or maybe that they've just never noticed before, that tends to stick with them, and that's important information for an investigator.
It's not Doreen's car, and Betty has no idea whose car it might be. Could that little white car belong to the person with Doreen at 4:50 a.m.? It's 4 hours later. Does Doreen have more than one visitor at her house today? Doreen doesn't show up for work all day. Her employees call her several times, but there's no answer. They leave several messages, but she never calls back. This isn't normal behavior for a successful businesswoman like Doreen. Something unusual is going on in this quiet, idyllic place today. Whatever it is, and however it started, it suddenly turns ugly. The town of Bonnyville, Alberta is located on the north shore of Jessie Lake. 40 kilometers northwest of Bonnyville, near the tiny hamlet of Iron River, lies the home of Doreen Bradley. And it's here, in this idyllic locale, on the day of Sunday, July 14th, 2002, that something unimaginable occurs. On Monday, July 15th, 2002, Doreen doesn't show up for work. This is the second day in a row that she's missing. It causes concern and confusion. Doreen manages the restaurant and the staff need to get a hold of her because food supplies are dwindling. But she's not answering her phone or returning messages. One of her employees remembers that she keeps a spare key to her house in the office and takes it. On the afternoon of Monday, July 15th, 2002, the concerned coworker goes to Doreen's house to make sure everything is okay. There's no answer at the door, so the coworker goes inside. The bathroom light and fan are on, but no one is in there. She finds Doreen on the living room floor, lying on her back, eyes open. For a moment, it might almost appear as if she's still alive. She rushes to see if there's anything that she can do. But Doreen is gone. Horrified, the employee runs out of the house to retrieve her cell phone from inside her vehicle. She's so horrified and flustered that she can't quite remember how to dial 911. She finally gets through, but finds that she can't quite remember where she is.
For a witness who's seen something traumatic, really all you can do is try to calm them down because they're in shock, essentially. You need to get them to the point where they can start to remember facts and images so that they can give you a proper account of what they saw.
Eventually, the employee manages to direct police to Doreen's home. Investigators arrive on the scene and quickly pronounce Doreen Bradley dead. There's no sign of forced entry and no real sign of a struggle. Doreen is wearing a denim summer dress, but it appears to be over top of a nightie.
In particular types of homicides, it's not uncommon for the perpetrator or the assailant to reposition their victim's body or perhaps redress the victim's body. This could be done for several reasons, perhaps in an attempt to mask the cause of death, perhaps to mask the time of death or the circumstances under which that person was there. But there's generally a very specific reason for doing it. A closer inspection reveals that the denim dress is torn and several buttons are scattered on the floor, making it pretty clear that she's wearing it when the attack occurs. The dress is also pulled up above her breasts and under her chin. It's doing nothing to hide her body. The nightie is bunched up just below her breasts and above her waist. Doreen is completely naked and exposed below her waist, and her legs are spread apart. Her body is covered with dozens of small black puncture wounds, but there's very little blood.
A forensic pathologist has the capacity to identify wounds that were made by a unique weapon. With the case of this victim, she had 31 stab wounds that were like punctures that had no blood coming from them. And by the angle, depth, width, and length of the wound, a forensic pathologist would help law enforcement agencies identify what type of weapon was used.
The cause of death is multiple stab wounds by an unidentified weapon. The best way that the medical examiner can describe it is a long, narrow, ice pick-like weapon. The puncture wounds are consistent with a small, round instrument, but there are abrasions indicating the weapon may have been rough in some places, as well as sharp. Nothing that could be the murder weapon is found in or around the house. In fact, investigators find nothing at the scene that can identify possible suspects.
During an autopsy, a forensic pathologist would be obtaining semen fluid or samples from a vaginal cavity to test for DNA of a suspect. Was this normal sexual activity in an individual, or was this a crime of passion and she was sexually assaulted?
The medical examiner collects fluid samples from Doreen and analyzes them for DNA. Each sample contains DNA from the same unidentified male. The examiner labels this person A. It's unclear whether A is the murderer or simply a sexual partner from before the murder.
Well, anyone who's with the victim of a homicide just prior to that homicide would be of importance as far as the investigation goes. They may know the victim. They may have had a reason to be with the victim. They may in fact be their murderer. It would be important to establish why they were with the victim of the homicide in the first place. Did they have a reason to be with that person?
There's no DNA on file that matches the samples from unknown male A.
DNA has become a vital tool in solving many types of crimes, particularly homicides and sexual assaults. But DNA presence in and of itself isn't always proof that a crime took place. One would have to be able to match the DNA located at the crime scene to a suspect. If that suspect doesn't have a DNA profile on the system, there's nothing to match it to, and we would have to wait until such time as we could find the suspect's DNA.
Investigators interview witnesses who describe two different vehicles that they saw on Doreen's property around the time of the murder. One is a small white car parked in front of her garage. The other is a black welding truck. The driver of the truck is described as a middle-aged man with shoulder-length, dark hair. Investigators attempt to locate the vehicles and the long-haired man, but are unsuccessful. Investigators are left with almost no clues and no known motive.
Often when investigations hit, a virtual roadblock, the investigators need to come up with different ways of obtaining evidence. They need to be creative and think outside the box, if you will. It doesn't always work, but sometimes a little creativity can generate a lot of information.
Investigators have a DNA sample from unknown male A. They need to match it to someone with a real name. In order to do that, they need more samples of DNA from people who know Doreen or who live or work in the area.
So generally you can't force someone to give a DNA sample unless you got a warrant for a DNA sample. So if there's reasonable grounds to obtain a DNA sample, the police can apply for a warrant, and then the individual does have to give their DNA. Otherwise, they can give a DNA sample by consent. So the police can ask for a DNA sample, and if someone decides to give one, they can. It's also possible that the police can try to obtain DNA from a suspect using kind of a sneaky method. For example, taking a cigarette butt out of the garbage, but then that evidence would be subject to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and could potentially be excluded depending on the way the police went about in obtaining it.
Investigators collect DNA from volunteers under the guise of donating blood to help the local community. A masonry worker named Fred Karras decides to give a sample.
When forensic experts are obtaining a DNA sample from a crime scene, and when they are obtaining DNA samples from the general public, they are looking for 100% guarantee that this is their suspect, and they want that DNA sample to be infallible. Unfortunately, there was not a perfect match for the unknown male.
Two of the samples, however, have an unusual number of similarities to the sample from A. It's possible that one or both of the blood donors are close relatives of A. One of those two donors is Fred Karras. Investigators attempt to obtain voluntary blood samples from all of the close male family members of Fred Karras and the other man. Investigators contact Fred and ask him to have his son, Landon, telephone them. A while later, Landon Karras calls, and investigators ask him to come by the station to talk about the homicide of Doreen Bradley. Landon agrees. When he arrives at the RCMP station, investigators question him about Doreen Bradley. He says he barely knows her, and only because his mother used to work with her 6 or 7 years ago. Investigators ask for his whereabouts on the days around the murder. Landon doesn't recall much about Friday or Saturday, but on Sunday, the actual day of the murder, he remembers going to the lake around 2 p.m. He confirms that he lives in the same rural area as Doreen. He also admits to being inside her house 2 years ago, before she moved in. He's there to help someone else move out. Investigators want a sample of Landon's DNA to compare it to the fluid samples found at the scene. He's reluctant because he expects his DNA may still be in the house from 2 years ago. He also feels like he's being accused of something, and he doesn't like that. Landon alludes to the fact that he's been in a lot of trouble recently, and that he's kind of uptight about all this.
Without a warrant, police need a suspect's consent to collect a DNA sample.
If the suspect consents to provide DNA, they may be charged with an offense. It's just like admitting that they committed a crime. If they were to do that without consulting a lawyer, that's essentially on the suspect. Now, if they indicated they wanted to consult a lawyer and the police didn't give them that ability, then there is a potential for that DNA to not be accepted as evidence by the courts. And any information obtained from that DNA or any charges resulting from it would ultimately be thrown out.
Investigators tell Landon that the blood sample he gives will only be analyzed in association with the murder of Doreen Bradley and nothing else. And once they're done with it, it'll be discarded. Landon says no, insisting that only if it becomes absolutely necessary will he provide a DNA sample. Investigators assure him that it will come to that eventually. So he finally agrees to go ahead and comply. Doreen Bradley is found dead in her rural home in the tiny hamlet of Iron River, Alberta, Canada, which is 18 miles northwest of Bonnyville. 31 stab wounds mar Doreen's body. The medical examiner finds a small amount of fluid from an unknown male, labeled as A. Men from the local community donate blood so investigators can look for a match. The results are in, and Fred Karras' blood reveals a partial match, leading investigators to seek samples from all of Fred's male relatives, including his son, Landon. Landon is strangely unwilling at first. Other members of his family are much more cooperative, including his father and 2 uncles. Landon finally agrees when he's told it will eventually become mandatory. Living in the rural area near Iron River, Landon is romantically involved with a woman who, like him, is in her 20s. But all is not as it seems. She's already in a common-law relationship with children. Because of the affair, Landon gets into several altercations with his lover's common-law husband that end up in charges being laid, along with a probation order to stay away from the woman.
There are many different types of court orders that contain no contact conditions. So an individual who's fearful of a domestic partner, a former domestic partner, can go to the court and apply for a protection order or a restraining order against that person. In this case, the no contact order is part of Landon's probation order. So that means that as part of his sentence, he was ordered by a judge not to have any contact with her.
But his lover doesn't want Landon to stay away and encourages him to come and see her. He still loves her too and wants to be with her. When it's discovered that Landon continues to see the woman, he's charged again for violating his probation order. These convictions are the trouble that Landon alludes to when investigators ask him to give a DNA sample.
Certainly police deal with many people involved in criminal activities, and the fact that somebody has a criminal record indicates that they have had contact with the police in the past. A criminal record for one particular crime does not mean necessarily that that person is capable or has automatically committed a different type of crime. It also doesn't mean that they've committed the same type of crime. It is an indication of past behavior, can also be an indicator of continued behavior or a pattern of behavior, but a criminal record in and of itself is not evidence. It certainly gives investigators a direction to go in terms of interrogating a suspect or considering who might be a suspect.
He doesn't recall much about Friday or Saturday, the 12th and 13th of July. But on Sunday, July 14th, 2002, Landon goes to the lake where several people see him. Some might say that it's odd that he has no alibi on the 2 days before the murder. But on the actual day of the murder, he's seen by several people 40 kilometers away from the crime scene.
When we look at someone who is intending to commit a criminal offense, it's not uncommon that they would attempt to set up an alibi for themselves by placing themselves somewhere else other than where the crime was about to take place, but close enough that they could justifiably be at the crime scene and then back to where their alibi is. That's something that people often consider. They're not always smart enough to pull off the perfect alibi, however.
Could Landon kill Doreen in the morning and have time to get to the lake by 2 p.m.? Is he the one who's in the house with Doreen when she calls her employee? Could he also be having an affair with her? Friends say that Landon is totally in love with his married girlfriend, who is in her 20s. They can't believe he would be involved with any other woman, never mind one who is more than twice his age. Landon's blood sample is examined by a DNA analyst, who advises police that it is an exact match to the DNA extracted from Doreen's body.
An exact match means the sample comes from the same person.
Investigators have been unable to find any other evidence that points to Landon. They can't even come up with a motive. But the DNA is such a perfect match that they feel it's all they need. On October 18, 2002, police charged Landon with first-degree murder of Doreen Bradley. After Doreen Bradley is brutally murdered, local police petition for DNA samples in hopes of connecting them with the evidence found at the scene. After they discover that Landon Karras is a perfect DNA match for the evidence found on victim Doreen Bradley, police arrest and charge him with first-degree murder. October 18th, 2002, Now in custody, investigators questioned Landon for 7.5 hours over 2 days. He denies any involvement with Doreen's death. He also repeatedly asks that a second sample of his blood be taken for DNA comparison.
It's not common for a suspect to offer the DNA sample to police. More often than not, they're trying to prevent their DNA from being obtained.
Investigators decide to not accept a second voluntary sample, but instead apply to a provincial judge to get a warrant. On October 24, 2002, a DNA warrant is issued by a provincial court judge. Investigators take a second blood sample from Landon Karras. Much like the first one, the second DNA sample is a perfect match for the DNA found inside Doreen Bradley. On Tuesday, September 27, 2005, the murder trial of Landon Karras begins. The prosecution paints a picture of Landon intentionally killing Doreen Bradley in a violent sexual assault. He's in Doreen's home on the morning of July 15, 2002. It's unclear whether Doreen knows he's there or if it's a surprise to her. The pathologist testifies that it's obvious that Doreen's denim dress is violently grabbed, causing 7 buttons to be ripped off. He also notes that the straps of the dress are used to strangle Doreen. At some point, there's an injury to the back of her head. This injury may have caused unconsciousness, but the pathologist is unable to say for sure. Judging from the torn dress, the position of the nightie and dress, the fact that she's naked and exposed, and that her legs are spread, it seems clear that Landon sexually assaults Doreen. His seminal fluid is later found inside Doreen, so sexual intercourse is definite. The pathologist can't say for sure that it's rape.
A slight scrape found within the vaginal area of the deceased during autopsy does not indicate that that was a sexual assault that she sustained.
The prosecution describes Landon stabbing Doreen 31 times with a weapon of some kind. They don't have the weapon, and they can't say exactly what the weapon is, only that it's a long, narrow, ice pick-like weapon. The pathologist says that the lack of blood around the wounds may be due to the strangulation. Doreen is already dead before most of the stab wounds are made. The defense claims that Landon is nowhere near her house when Doreen is murdered. A witness testifies that around the time of the murder, she sees Landon at the Fork Lake campground, which is about 40 kilometers away. Oddly enough, other witnesses claim that Landon is with them at the time of the murder, but not at the campground.
Alibis may seem like a slam dunk, but if there are multiple alibi witnesses who contradict each other or contradict the version of events of the accused, it's up to the jury to determine whether any of those witnesses hold credence.
Many people from the community believe that Landon is innocent, and they do what they can to help him. 48 letters are submitted to the court, each one expressing a strong belief in his innocence. His father, Fred Karras, is absolutely certain of his son's innocence. Fred goes so far as to suggest that someone collected Landon's semen from the truck where he and his girlfriend make out, and then planted it on Doreen's body. Many of Landon's supporters point out that he's almost completely bald, and what little hair he has is short and blonde. He looks nothing like the middle-aged man with long, shoulder-length dark hair fleeing the scene. Never mind the fact that the middle-aged man is driving a black welding truck. And Landon drives a burnt orange pickup truck. There's also some suggestion that the murder weapon could be a welder's rod, which would make sense given the black welding truck. Supporters can't believe that 28-year-old Landon, who's totally in love with his 20-something girlfriend, would be interested in a 58-year-old woman, never mind sexually assault her. The defense stresses the fact that the prosecution has not provided a murder weapon, fingerprints, witnesses who can place Landon at the scene, or even a motive. Their case is relying solely on the fact that his DNA is a match for the DNA found inside Doreen. In closing, the prosecution points out that the odds of a random male having the same DNA profile as a crime scene sample are 1 in 5.6 trillion.
DNA evidence can be a very powerful tool, and it's seen as very persuasive by juries because it's based in science.
The defense suggests that Landon could have had a sexual fling with Doreen long before the murder. His DNA could have remained for up to 3 weeks. The defense also points at other suspects who might be guilty, such as the long-haired man in the truck that was never found. The prosecution urges the jury not to be fooled by red herrings. It might be tempting to blame this on the mysterious man in the truck, but it's a red herring. It doesn't explain Landon's DNA. Both sides rest, and the jury retires to deliberate. According to witnesses, while waiting for the jury to come back, the prosecutor admits that he doesn't think Landon will be found guilty because there isn't enough evidence. On November 10th, 2005, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury finds Landon Karras guilty of first-degree murder. Witnesses say that the prosecutor is visibly surprised by the verdict, and he tells the judge that he didn't expect it. Karras did not testify during the trial, but he speaks to the court now. He says that he is sad and disappointed, and he wants everyone to know that he did not kill Doreen Bradley. The judge immediately sentences Landon Karras to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years.
In Canada, first-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years.
Friends and family of Karras, as well as many townspeople, are shocked and saddened because they don't believe that Karras is a killer. In November 2007, Alberta's highest court dismisses an appeal to grant Karras a new trial. They say that the presence of his DNA inside the victim's body has never been sufficiently explained by Karras. Karras tries again, but on March 27, 2008, the Supreme Court of Canada refuses to hear his appeal. They do not give a reason for their decision. For the tiny community of Iron River and the town of Bonnyville, life slowly returns to normal. Some take comfort in the knowledge that a murderer has been locked up and that a victim has been given justice. Others will always question what really happened on that day in July of 2002. The entire truth may never be known.